There's a country where stone remembers what books forgot. Where the ocean draws messages in a desert only the sky can read. Where time doesn't march forward, it spirals like a conch shell echoing the Andes. This is Peru. Not the postcard you've seen 1,000 times, but the one whispered in markets at first light, carried in Quechua lullabies and stacked in terraces that catch the breath of mountains. If you listen, the road will tell you where to go. If you're quiet, the stones will answer. The world knows a handful of names. Machu Picchu in the clouds, rainbow ridges painted by rain, a line-drawn hummingbird in a sea of sand. But the story of Peru is older than headlines and taller than bucket lists. In valleys the maps barely bother to name. Mornings begin with smoke, with prayer, with work that looks like music. Hands salting 1,000 mirrors at Maras, feet tracing circles at Moray, where seeds learned new climates centuries ago. Across these spines of rock a road once stitched an empire together. Not to crush the land, but to travel lightly across it. The Qhapaq Ñan still holds the weight of footsteps, and sometimes the echo of a runner who refuses to admit he is made of time. Here, cities don't announce themselves. They wait. They test your breath and your patience, then unveil a geometry so precise it feels inevitable. Where the desert meets the stars, lines become questions. Were they prayers, calendars, invitations to the wind? Peru answers with a smile. Walk the lines, listen, decide. And when the stone ends, the forest begins. A cathedral of chlorophyll where colour has a voice, where names are given by birds before they are written in books. Some mountains are not climbed, they are consulted. Offer a leaf, a breath, a silence, and the peaks will let you pass. On a lake where the sun is said to have been born, homes are woven from plants, rebuilt to remain themselves. Like Peru, renewed by the act of remembering. This is not an itinerary, it's a pulse. Over the next miles we'll follow it, from a city before time to a message written in sand. From salt that shines like constellations to forests that breathe rain back into the sky. At Moray, the earth becomes a tuning fork. Circles carved into the hillside hold dawn like a breath, each ring a different note of temperature and light. Here the farmers of the high Andes built an instrument for climate. Terraces stacked like pages, each a micro-season, so seeds could practice being brave at altitude before they faced the real mountain. Drainage where storms are sudden, shelter where the wind forgets to be kind. Sun caught, shade rationed, moisture kept like a promise. Circles that taught seeds to dream at different altitudes. Call it an agricultural laboratory, but its equations were written in warmth and patience. A few degrees difference between steps, enough to turn doubt into harvest. Follow the taste of the land and you arrive at Maras, a mountainside shattered into mirrors, each pool a shallow sky. Since Inca times, a buried spring full of salt has been coaxed into fields of light. Brine flows, sun works, crystals rise, a slow alchemy that tastes of stone and time. Adaptation as art, wall edges trimmed with the same care as a quilt, water timed by intuition, harvest lifted with wrists that remember the weight of seasons. Ownership here is measured in pans and patience. Knowledge passes hand to hand like warm bread. How to read the sun, how to hear when a channel is full without looking. 2 valleys, 1 lesson. Shape the land gently and it answers. Design for climate and the climate becomes partner, not adversary. In these amphitheatres of earth and salt, people tuned the elements until they sang back. Beyond the terraces, the mountain spine lifts its blue shoulder. There are roads that cut land apart and roads that stitch it back together. High on the spine of the Andes, a single thread holds mountains in conversation. Qhapaq Ñan, the great Inca road network, carried across deserts and jungles, salt flats and snow, a geometry of movement drawn on the body of a continent. This wasn't just empire in motion, it was reciprocity. Roads paying respect to terrain, curving where the mountain insists, bridging only when the river consents. Every choice speaks humility, paving that breathes in rain, edges that ask feet to place themselves with care, signs set not in letters, but in the rules of the land. Caravans knew the cadence, fibre, maize, copper, and stories, moving like weather along a road that understood weight and time. The Qhapaq Ñan still lives, not as ruins but as responsibility. Communities patch it like a quilt because roads, like stories, survive by being retold. Follow it long enough and the world reduces to rhythm, step, breath, step, the mountain's heart syncing with your own. Where the path vanishes into cloud, a citadel wakes. Some places insist you arrive with effort. Choquequirao is one of them. A city that asks for your breath before it offers its own. They call it Machu Picchu's sister, but sisters are not copies, they are echoes. This one chose distance over crowds, silence over spectacle. The same precision of stone, the same conversation with gravity, a different way of listening. Here, wonder costs more steps. The price of entry is a long descent a longer return, and a promise to carry out exactly what you carried in. In return, a solitude that feels like being remembered. When the sun lifts higher, the canyon begins to breathe. Thermals curl like invisible ropes. And then the old country opens its wings. Everything is edge here, fields balanced on vertigo, stairways arguing with sky, rooms that frame distances like portraits of absence. What makes a place sacred? The stones, the view, the stories, or the way your heartbeat finally matches the mountains? Design here is a verb. Walls teaching wind to behave, stairways coaching legs into patience, terraces translating steep into sustenance. A city not discovered, remembered. The quiet is not emptiness, it's a ledger. For every hour you carried weight, here is a minute that doesn't need words. Majesty isn't always loud. Sometimes it just refuses to fall. When you leave, the city doesn't change. The climb back writes a new shape in your breath, and the cliff keeps its counsel. Descend where the rock breaks into river. The earth inhales here, long and heavy, and you can feel the ribcage of the Andes rise beneath your feet. Colca Canyon, where depth isn't an absence but a cathedral carved by time. Gravity rules everything unless you learn its language. For centuries, farmers have translated steep into harvest, thread by thread, wall by wall, a hillside quilt that catches water, holds soil, and turns vertigo into bread. Irrigation is a whisper here, not a flood. Channels persuade, they don't command. A hand tips a gate, a field answers, green waking up in strokes. The tools are simple: stone, wood, patience. What's complex is the listening. To slope, to wind, to the memory of a wall that remembers every rain. Work happens at a human tempo. Step, lift, turn, breathe. The same rhythm from abuelos to grandchildren. A choreography the mountain recognizes as kinship. When sun warms the rock and the canyon exhales, the elders tell you to look up. Wings like held breath, shadow crossing terraces, time stitched to silence. Here, flight is a form of prayer. In Colca, blessings aren't spoken, they glide. They write their amen on the canyon's page and vanish into light. Depth, tamed by terrace. Hunger, kept at arm's length by walls no higher than a knee. A valley where the smallest stones do the greatest work. From chiseled stone to written sand. On this desert that drinks the sky and leaves no footprints, someone once took a needle of intention and stitched the ground to the stars. Hummingbirds, hands, spirals, figures so vast they ignore the scale of the body. Road straight lines, arrowing horizons, whispers carved by removing a single skin of stone. No paint, no pigment, just absence, carefully arranged. A grammar of light and shadow that only fully exists when the sun decides. Meaning here is suspended between astronomy and ceremony. calendars for solstice, processional paths for offerings, signals to gods who read from above. The Nazca answer like desert does, by refusing haste. From the ground you hold fragments, a beak, a coil, a hand reaching. To read the sentence, you must become weather. Lift, circle, widen your patience. As the sun tilts, the drawings awaken, edges gain a voice, angles point toward somewhere you can't quite name. Maybe these are not pictures but agreements. Between wind that erases and people who rewrite, between stones that warm by day and stars that coldly count. Drawings so large they're only legible to time. What remains certain is the devotion. To walk beside a line is to feel a pulse in gravel, a rhythm older than language, steady as breath, patient as drought. Here ceremony doesn't end, it fades into a kind of listening. The desert speaks in outlines, the heavens answer in distances. The desert ends where water remembers the jungle. When the desert ends, breath condenses into river. Here the morning is not light, it's sound, wings, droplets, 1,000 small decisions waking at once. Manu and Tambopata, forests that don't just hold life, they negotiate it. Every colour here has a voice, every voice a purpose you can hear if you unlearn your hurry. And then the choir arrives, macaws exploding from a clay lick, minerals bright on their tongues, arguments in blue and red that taste like rain. In this place, indigenous knowledge is the compass. Which bend hides a caiman, which fruit feeds a tapir but harms a child, which silence means a cat is near. Listening is survival. The forest speaks in breaths and intervals, a frog's metronome under a leaf, a branch that settles wrong, a hush that lands too suddenly to be weather. Science measures, spirits remember. Here the two are not rivals but relatives, data finding its patience, ritual finding its proof. Even the light is alive, caught on wings, braided through lianas, stacked in green stories where sun is a rumour that finally keeps its promise. Some mornings the forest turns a page and reads itself aloud. The map is not on paper, it's inherited, taught in footstep and taste, in which vines hold water, which bark heals fever, which stories keep children from rivers when the moon is wrong. When darkness arrives, it doesn't empty the forest, it edits it, leaving only what you're meant to notice. In Manu and Tambopata, the glossary comes feathered. Here, names are given by birds before books. Climb back towards the roof of the world. Before the sun admits its morning, the mountains already know. Ausangata waits with ice on its breath. Vinikunka turns in sleep, rainbow bones under a grey blanket. Here the peaks are not scenery, they are Apu spirits with jurisdiction. You greet them with Colca and breath because up here, respect is oxygen. Life at altitude is a negotiation. Wool for warmth, grazing for miles, storms for memory. The animals teach patience, the cold teaches precision. Pilgrims come when the calendar says the sky is listening. Songs woven from footsteps, promises carried in the mouth to keep them warm. This is Aini reciprocity. Give a leaf, take a safe crossing. Offer your gratitude, borrow a clear day. Some mountains are not climbed, they are consulted, and then colour learns the language of stone. Strata stacked like weathered prayer flags, iron and copper, braided with time. Every footprint is temporary by design. The mountain keeps the original. You don't conquer altitude, you borrow it, paying in slowness, in listening, in the small currency of warmth. Ice and fire take shifts here, glacier and sun negotiating the day, while wind edits the margins. Stories are carried on threads and lungs, which pass is safe, which slope sings, which dream to leave in the cairn so it finds its way home. When you turn away, the mountain remains exactly itself, and you're a little more so. Where water is sky's handwriting, a lake begins to speak. At this altitude, light arrives first as a reflection. Lake Titicaca is a sky that forgot to fly. A mirror where stories row themselves into morning. Here, homes begin as plants. Totora reeds, cut, dried, layered, become islands that float, boats that breathe, and floors that exhale when you walk. Engineering as inheritance, stack, overlap, listen to the weight. Add new layers as the old surrender to the lake. A conversation with rot and buoyancy, renewed every week. Belonging here isn't fixed to rock, it's woven. A village that floats because it remembers how to let go. Boats shaped like questions, answers braided into cord, work that smells of sun and sweet water. The Aymara and Quechua remember, this lake is where the sun was born, a golden body rising from cold blue, sending first light to teach the world its edges. Some stories are not entertainment, they're navigation, instruction manuals written in sky and water. Cosmology lives in cloth and ceremony, in how a boat's prow points, in which reed is chosen for cradle or roof. Identity here is maintenance. A house that must be rebuilt to remain itself. On Titicaca, permanence is a verb. You keep what you honor by remaking it, the way day remakes night and the lake remakes the shore. Southwest, the desert keeps another city of ghosts. In a desert that remembers the sea, a city of clay still breathes. Chan, capital of the Chimu, endless rooms, courtyards, corridors, a geometry of shade drawn to hold back heat and hold in memory. This was an ocean-minded empire. Walls speak water, fish in file, nets in pattern, waves walking the perimeter. Clay becomes archive, each relief a tide chart, a prayer, a ledger. Adobe is not forever, and yet what weathers survives, what rusts. Here time is kept with straw and mud, renewed the way a shoreline redraws itself. Between storms, each brick remembers a hand, each seam remembers water. What holds the city together is not hardness, but repetition. Layer upon patient layer, the Chimu worked with what the desert offered. Salt air, hard light, cold nights, distance. Power here wasn't the hammer, it was design in dialogue with climate. Not far from these corridors, the old ceremonial mountains rise, Huaca del Sol, Huaca de la Luna, earthen pyramids where colour still argues with wind, faces stare from walls, and histories crowd the stairways, ceremony etched in pigment and dust. The bargain between drought and abundance negotiated in offerings, narratives poured into earth until earth began to answer. Here cities rose without steel and lasted beyond it, skyscrapers of mud that survived empires of metal. What endures is what can be remade. The wall accepts weather, the city accepts time, the desert accepts the sea back grain by grain. Listen long enough and the coast explains the city. 1,000 repetitions that look like change, 1,000 changes that resolve to pattern. Clay learning to move like water. Far from headlines and itineraries, Peru is not a checklist, it's a pulse. Terraces tuned to wind, deserts writing to the sky, forests naming the dawn. Every village, every stone, every breeze carries a story older than history. If this journey stirred something, travel with us to the next forgotten wonder. Subscribe and share the road. The road continues.